Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm ZS Caravallo from ZK Research, and I'm here at Celona Networks headquarters. I'm with Rajeev Shah, CEO of Celona Networks. Rajeev, how you doing?
I'm doing very good. How are you?
Good, good. Before we get into this, I want to talk about 5G, private 5G. For those who don't know Celona, though, give a little background on Celona Networks and a bit of background on yourself as well.
Sure. Look, I am a self-professed wireless geek. I've been in the wireless industry for
a freak,
over 2
as you
decades.
guys call them now.
Or a freak, as we now call them, and it's freak with a Q. So please don't get me into trouble for being politically incorrect. But I've been a wireless geek, wireless freak for 25 years. A lot of time at Aruba in the Wi-Fi industry when Wi-Fi was in the super formative stages.
When you're an airhead.
I was an airhead back then. Yes, exactly. And 2019 or 2018, that time frame, the observation that me and my co-founders had was there was this demand coming for more reliable wireless connectivity, and that really needed cellular networks. But the existing technology stacks in the market were very telco-oriented, and so we kind of decided to take that background of the enterprise Wi-Fi world, merge it with my co-founder who comes from Qualcomm, and say, how do we create the best-of-breed private 5G solution? And that's the journey we have been on for the last 5 years.
Yeah, and that's great. In fact, it's been a journey for 5 years, and I want to talk about where we are in the industry. I know it seems ever since we've been talking about private cellular, there's been a high level of interest from customers.
Yes.
I think one of the things you bring is a simple way to deploy. Now, with that being said, I think if you were to project back a few years, we would have assumed we're further along than we are. I do think, though, AI might prove to be a seminal moment for private cellular. In fact, I was at CES this year. I watched the Jensen Huang keynote, CEO of NVIDIA, of course, and he talked about the next wave of AI being physical AI, which, of course, is autonomous vehicles, robots, cobots in the workplace. One of the comments he made was, in a few years, you'll never mow your own lawn. It'll be autonomous as well. And so talk about how cellular, private cellular, becomes an enabler of that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, when we started the company, we kind of had this guess that AI would drive private 5G, similar to how mobile compute drove Wi-Fi in the enterprise back 20 years back. But we didn't know the timing. It's very hard always to predict the timing of exactly when this happens. And subtly, a lot of these things have been happening in places like manufacturing floors and warehouses. We have had autonomous guided vehicles and robots and things like that show up in those places, showing up the lack of connectivity. And those tend to be the biggest use cases of the private 5G network for a while. That having been said, when something hits that mainstream like AI has done in the last 12 to 18 months, it just brings it top of mind for everybody. And I think that's what we are seeing in the market right now, that every enterprise, every manufacturing CIO, CDO, CTO needs to build an AI strategy. And the smart ones are figuring out that without a really reliable, secure wireless edge, there's no point investing in GPUs, whether you put it on the device or edge. You need a reliable wireless edge. And 5G, and private 5G specifically, is the best connectivity technology for that.
Yeah, and while I think Wi-Fi has made great leaps and bounds, in fact, I'm expecting a lot from Wi-Fi 7. I think what we're talking about here shows where the gaps in Wi-Fi are. It isn't the ultra-reliable network that cellular is. And if we're going to be talking about warehouses being run by autonomous robots, food delivery services, things like that, it has to be cellular, right?
It has to be cellular. And as much as things like reliability and latency have a role to play, the staggering part, especially with someone who is enterprise focused like Celona, is candidly cellular is cheaper to deploy in those places than Wi-Fi is. Because you just think about the number of access points needed. And therefore the number of cables you need to run, the number of switch ports and the power, it all adds up. And we find in most industrial environments, it's a fraction of the cost of Wi-Fi. And it's so much more reliable, so much more secure.
All right, I hadn't thought about that, but I guess that's something I'm going to have to focus on looking at that. Now, Rajeev, I want to make sure I get this correct. One of the ways I know a market has reached a certain level of maturity is the big analyst firms create their decision tools. And Gartner recently published their first MQ covering private 5G, and they called it the Private Mobile Network Services Magic Quadrant. I think the name services being in there is significant, and I know you and I have talked about this. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, it is a symptom of something that somewhat plagues the private 5G market. Because it's private 5G, and the word 5G is there, unfortunately this gets mixed up a lot with the telco ecosystem. Somewhat understandably, because in the end cellular started there. But specifically with this Magic Quadrant, I think that is what led to the services becoming the focus of the Magic Quadrant, where the group within Gartner that has been covering private 5G has been predominantly the service provider telco group so far. And so they looked at this very much from that lens, and therefore they added the word services to it, which in our opinion gives you a very fragmented view of the market, but it is what we have today.
Now, in their defense, though, from an infrastructure perspective, there's really only you and a handful of other companies. Like, it would be pretty boring MQ.
Maybe that is the requirement. Maybe they needed a subset of people.
Frankly, a couple of them, the bigger telco-based ones, really don't have a valid solution for enterprises. But Celona was mentioned, though, as a private wireless provider for several of the MNOs and the service providers. And so talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, look, we are the platform of choice for a lot of those leading mobile network operators and SIs who are offering this as a service. Verizon and NTT DATA being prominent amongst them, but we are obviously got with a lot more people also in that list, and we are very proud of it. We do think that in the end, you've got to provide an enterprise-focused platform that works for either the IT to manage it themselves or for service provider to offer it. So we are in that list. For sure. Yeah,
the media wasn't too kind to Gartner either. That Magic Quadrant did get panned quite a bit in the media. Yeah. What was your take on that? Did you think it was justified?
I think it was, in the sense that it gave a fragmented view, like I said earlier. Yeah. I think the challenge is it was approaching it from one lens, which is to say, how do service providers offer private 5G as a service? And it didn't really give a full 360-degree view to say, if you are an enterprise customer, what are my choices, and then in the various choices, who are the best players. And I think that's one of the things that I think was missing. And candidly, we brought it up to the Gartner team during the process. And unfortunately, in the timing wise, they were too far along the path, and so it didn't work out. They
always say that.
But, it is what it is. I think that might be the single biggest confusion. I think if you take a step back and look at every other enterprise networking technology, it's Wi-Fi, SD-WAN, LAN, typically what you have is you have a Magic Quadrant for the equipment providers, you have a Magic Quadrant for the service providers, and now if you are an enterprise decision maker, you can look at both of these and say, okay, what are the pros and cons of the technology platforms and what are the pros and cons of the service platforms, and then make my choices. And I think not having that full picture, this one Magic Quadrant by itself kind of then makes it a little tough for that process.
Yeah, I think that's a true statement, and I think there's, when I talk to IT decision makers and network engineers, at least the early adopters, they would rather deploy it themselves. I think there's a certain level of frustration when dealing with the mobile operators that you don't get the data that you need, right? And in fact, I was talking to one of the stadium operators that said, we just want to know the number of handsets connected. We can't get that from from them sometimes. And I think also deploying your own DAS, it's carrier dependent. It can be very expensive. You don't have a lot of control. And so I understand why, when you get into some of those environments, you'd want to run your own network.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think enterprises want choice.
Yeah.
In the end, right? And I think to give credit to some of these providers who were named, like Verizon and NTT, for as an example, they have given a very CIO-friendly choice to the customers. And they've used our platform very successfully to say, look, you can get a fully managed service, but you can still have visibility, or you could pick specific areas that you want own control and move at your speed, and we can create that. And I think that's a requirement. And I think some of their leadership position, reflected that, because I think customers appreciate that. But I think even that is still an incomplete view. Like you said, there are some other customers, and many of them, who today run their own Wi-Fi networks, their own LANs, and they want to make this a part of their own LAN and run it like another technology as a part of it.
Yeah, and so what happens from here? What's your advice to customers?
So I think two things. I think if a customer were to listen to this, I would tell them, like most other enterprise networking technologies, you do have a choice. I would not fall for the trap that I cannot run this network. That is a fallacy that has been propagated by, I think, traditional incumbents in general. So that's number one. You can come to someone like Celona, run this like you run your Cisco, HP, Aruba, Mist, Wi-Fi networks, and that's very much possible.
In fact, you set up almost exactly the same, right? If you can set one up, it's not a big spread.
It is absolutely the intention from day one, because we have taken that DNA and applied it to this technology. The second I would say is, when I look ahead, I do expect Gartner will cover this from that side as well. I do know that the enterprise team is a lot more engaged now. It's the team that today covers technologies like I just described. And I would highly expect that if you are looking for someone like Gartner to give you advice, reach out to the enterprise team as well and pick their brain when you're going through this process. So you don't have to take as a view of a vendor like Celona. I suspect you will get a more rounded view by talking to both the enterprise analyst and the service provider analyst in Gartner as well.
All right, and just now let's talk Celona a little bit. Now, what's next for you guys?
So we have a few interesting things that are cooking. I think over the last 18 months, we have really gotten traction within the verticals of oil and gas, petrochemicals, manufacturing, logistics, and transportation. I think that's the sweet spot where this has really picked up steam. And for us right now, this is a lot of getting to scale across the world in these verticals. So that's number one. So we are expanding our sales teams, we are expanding our channel teams, we are growing our partnerships across all ecosystem vendors so that we can address this broad market. The second significant thing over the last 12 months is we have completed our integrations and certifications with both T-Mobile and AT&T.
That's exciting.
To be able to offer a true neutral host network on our platform. And I think that opens up the general enterprise market, because there are hospitals like Stanford Healthcare, universities, general offices, hospitality, MDUs. Everyone has an in-building cellular coverage problem. And we have offered suddenly a problem that is truly economical and cost-effective, operationally easy to deploy those networks. So I think that's a huge growth vector that we are very excited about. And the third important thing is we've been expanding internationally now for over 18 months, and we are starting to see a lot of results of that, especially in Europe, Middle East, and Mexico, LATAM. But this is the year we also take that to Asia Pacific. So we have now launched in Japan, Korea, and we are about to do so in Australia. So 3 critical growth vectors that we are pursuing, and we're very excited about all of them, honestly.
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you brought up the hospital piece there, because it reminds me of a discussion I had with the hospital CIO. They've got Wi-Fi everywhere, but a lot of the doctors, they don't turn it on their phones. And,
that's right.
And most hospitals don't have great cellular coverage inside.
Yes.
Right, and you can just imagine when you walk around all the equipment there, you can see why. And so to me, that is one of the big emerging industries for private cellular.
I agree, and we have a great network deployed here in Stanford Healthcare, and just watching the pace at which they are getting value out of that network has been extraordinary. I think all the things you said, but the minute you got a neutral host network and you get that service going, they keep discovering new things that the Wi-Fi is just too congested for. And it just makes so much more sense to use this new network and get a nice quality of service. So I think healthcare is a vertical that I'm very excited for in the coming 12 months.
Yeah, and then lastly, you guys earlier this year launched your user community, the Freaks, as we talked about. How's that been going?
It has been unbelievable. So as you said, we have called the community Frequency, and members belonging to that community are called Freaks lovingly. And we have had great participation. We followed up the in-person event we did in November with 2 virtual sessions. Both of them have been highly attended by customers and channel partners. And honestly, everything from our product getting feedback to just the customers talking amongst themselves about use cases, telling us the kind of partnerships we need to do. As an example, I just got a suggestion from one of those freaks last week to say that there's a very specific push-to-talk app that they want on the iPhone to be tested well on the private 5G network. I think that's a classic value of such a community, where we are able to now truly get these solutions and then cross-pollinate them across that. So I'm very excited about that.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think it's a great time for private 5G. I think your point on maturity is a good one. I think we are on that ramp. I think this Gartner Magic Quadrant, controversial as it is a step in that direction. And I suspect in the next 9 months, we'll have even more fun things to talk about.
Yeah, I think my takeaway here is that private cellular, not as hard as you think it is.
Not at all.
It's coming soon to an enterprise near you.
Absolutely.
And if you've been frustrated with only one deployment model, there is choice. And so take a look at Celona as a way to do it yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, Rajeev. Well, appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zeus.
Thanks. So on behalf of Rajeev Shah, CEO of Celona, I'm Zeus Caravalis from ZK Research, and thanks for watching. Give us a like and hit the subscribe button. And I'll see you next time on the next episode of ZKast.